So the 5D Mark III, it's got to be one of those cameras I've been skirting around doing the review on. But look, 5D Mark III has probably been one of the best-selling full-frame cameras of all time, and there's a good reason for it. I've shot quite a few weddings with the 5D Mark III, and I've shot some portrait sessions as well, and I've just got a few examples to give you as well. We're going to talk about all of the good stuff: ISO, autofocus, what it's just like to own and use in general. There are a few areas that the Mark III gave us some really significant upgrades and really did well. The first one is just the overall ergonomics, how the camera feels in your hand and where all the buttons are placed. And Canon knocked it out of the park with this. It is such a nice camera to hold and to use. I could say in the hand, it is one of the most comfortable cameras I've ever used, perhaps the nicest of all. This was the first time that you could have a mid-range camera, a mid-level camera, so not like one of the 1D bodies, where you could actually use the 50-1.2, the 85 1.2 at 1.2 and hit focus pretty consistently. That was just a game changer for so many people. It really changed things massively from going from sort of 1 in 3 shots in focus to 4 out of 5 being in focus. Big jump up. Much better autofocus system. You also got more focus points. I used to narrow them down to like the 15 or 16 or whatever it was of the cross type ones, and that gave me the ability to move the focus point around quickly in the camera, which was really nice. I like that about it too. Excellent focusing system. Not the best in low light. I still feel that the 5D Mark III struggled even compared to the D600 in low light. I like with Canon what they do is they'll give you like the focus square, and then there's a dot in the middle, so you can put the dot over the iris or something and it will go for that. 5D Mark III also gave us very quiet shooting. It has a quiet shutter mode, which is different from what you get on other cameras. It was just very quiet. It also gave us dual card slots. Canon reacting to pressure at the time because cards were failing. I mean, I knew wedding photographers who were losing cards from weddings, and so this was a response. They also added programmable button at the front, which you can press. I love having programmable buttons on the front of the camera that you can press with your fingers. I just think that's fantastic. I absolutely love it. So I set that button on the front to be ISO, so you could press it and scroll the wheel and change your ISO. Very nice way to work. And again, the ergonomics top-notch. Really happy with it. And before I get onto the color rendition and just the overall feel of what the files are like, because I've got a few positive and negative things to say about that. The other area I want to touch on is the ISO performance. And again, I think the ISO performance from this camera is brilliant. Very good. And for weddings, I was fine using it all the way up to 12,800. This picture that I'm going to show you now is shot at ISO 10,000, and I think as long as you've got, it's always about quality of light rather than quantity. You need to have some, obviously, but as long as you've got half decent light, the 5D Mark III will give you good results in low light. And so this is at ISO 10,000, and I think it's just worked out really well. And I had no problem shooting up to 12,800, which means you can do a lot of stuff without having to use flash. You can get away with a lot of like the lower light stuff without flash, which can look really nice because you can get all of that ambient light in and it can look good. You can get the original colours rather than have to blast everything with flash. Right, now we're going to get on to what are the files like. I thought the files were fine. They were good, and I liked the work that I got out of it. I never felt that the colours were as good as on the 5D Mark II and the 60 Mark I. Now, I know people always say, well, you're shooting RAW, you can change it to everything. No, it doesn't work like that. Trying to push and manipulate colours into ranges where you want them to be when another camera has it already is also about time and how much inconvenience that is for you. The 5D Mark III is good though. So I'm not going to say this is a negative. I'm just saying compared to the Mark II and the 60 Mark I and the 5D Mark I, it's not sitting at the same table as them. I would have no problem if you said this is your portrait photography camera from now on. I would be fine and happy with it because it's that good. So I'm only going to mark it as one step down from the other ones. So it sounds like I'm being negative, but I'm sort of scoring it like a 9 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10. See it like that. But it's just that when you've used the other cameras from Canon that I mentioned, it's hard to kind of move to the Mark III for those reasons. For me, that's just my personal feeling on it. Having said that, obviously it's very good, and being able to nail focus is excellent. Now, I think on the files, they are applying sharpening to the raw files. So I think it's a common misconception amongst a lot of photographers that raw files are it's just pure what's coming out of the sensors. Rubbish. Raw files are edited by the camera and then they're stuck onto the memory card. Got tons of flexibility in them, but they apply things like a colour palette to it, they apply sharpening, they apply noise reduction, all these kind of things. And Canon made the 5D Mark III very sharp, like really, really sharp. And I don't really have a problem with it, but I think that they probably went a little bit too far. It's good if you're impressed by sharpness, which you shouldn't be. I'm not going to mark it down for that. I just think it is what it is. But we need to talk though about dynamic range, because that's where it depends on you. It depends on how you shoot, whether this is an issue or not. So for portraits, for me, in a studio environment, no problem whatsoever, because I can control the lighting. The Mark III's dynamic range is weird. It's worse than the 5D Mark II, and it's not to do with what the XO marks say, because it doesn't quite work like that. Having an actual rating of however many stops, they say it has 12 stops of dynamic range, and you have another camera with 12 stops of dynamic range. When you try to manipulate those files and say you want to open the shadows or bring the highlights back, first thing for beginners to understand is that what you see on the screen is like the surface level of what's actually contained in the file. So when you move those sliders about, you're bringing to the surface. If I give you a box with things in it, what you see at the top level doesn't tell you what's in the box further down, and what we see on the screen is just what's at the top. So when we lift shadows, for example, that's like reaching into the box, grabbing something that's further down inside the box and bringing it up to the top, but it's all in the box, it's all contained there. When you try to recover the shadows on the 5D Mark III, what happens is you get this tartan crisscross pattern appear with lots of green and red, or magenta, green and magenta noise dots, and it destroys and disrupts the picture. So whilst it technically recovers 12 stops, it does it in a destructive manner. It's a real problem. When the camera came out, I do remember, and it was always kind of been like that with that camera, that people were like, what the hell is this? Why is the chroma noise so bad on it? And that was just a reality. And I also noticed this at weddings. Like, I would shoot things that because I wanted to use it and try it out because I had it for my portraits, and I couldn't shoot certain situations with it that I would do on my Nikon without using flash. So that is the ultimate outcome, for instance, for weddings, is that you'll need to use flash or reflectors in situations where the Nikon wouldn't for quite some time yet. So it does make a difference, and you have to be careful with that. There's tons of amazing work shot on the 5D Mark III where you could sort of say, but look at this proves that doesn't matter. And I kind of agree with that, but it's always down to like, how much of a compromise are you willing to make on certain things when you know that something else can do it to a point where you don't even have to think about that being a problem anymore. And if you shot with a 5D Mark III all the time, then you wouldn't know any difference, you wouldn't be bothered about it. It's just that when you've shot as many different cameras as I have, you know that something else is out there where this isn't going to be a problem, so you'll shoot that. So overall, what do I think about the 5D Mark III? Do I recommend it? It's a tough one. So here's what I would say. If you're looking for a one camera to do it all, in that price range, I think it's a very good choice, because it's very competent at most things. It's a jack of all trades camera, master of none, and often that's the best camera to own to get everything done. I think that the D800 is a better camera. So if you're going for one or the other, I would scream the 800 all day long, unless you are a studio-based portrait photographer, in which case I would push you towards the Canon all the time. That's if you've got no system. This is difficult because I know so many photographers personally that shot amazing work on this camera, and I've liked work that I've shot on it as well. I think that's what it would come down to with me. I'd like to think about what are you actually shooting, but it's hard for me to not recommend it because it is such an excellent camera. If it's the right price point for you, and you want to do maybe some weddings, you want to do some portrait work and stuff, you could just get it and be happy with it, but you will need to learn where its limitations are in its dynamic range for your processing. That means you'll have to understand the times when you're going to have to add flash, when if you're coming from a different camera system, you wouldn't even be thinking about it. And you'll also have to deal with the fact that it's not got the best focus in low light. Cameras like the D750 would probably be, I guess, a similar price used, and it's just going to be a lot better in difficult conditions. It's going to smoke it, basically. So it was a really good upgrade in its time, but it frustrated some people at the same time, I think. And when you look at the work that people do and you think that, oh, the pictures they're producing on it are excellent anyway, it's always going to be because the photographer's a good photographer and they're going to do that on any camera they get. It doesn't mean they won't have personal preferences for things that they'll use. And I know that when the Mark IV came out, a lot of photographers were breathing the sigh of relief that were on the Mark III, because the Mark IV was solving a whole bunch of issues. So my feeling on this is, if you're on a Mark II or a Mark I or a 60 Mark I and you're looking for something in dual card slots, DSLR, I would skip the Mark III and jump to the Mark IV, because the Mark IV fixes those issues. That's the end. Take care.